what are the critical success factors for an effective board? So we have seen the characteristics of an effective board. So what are the critical success factors? What must a board of directors do to be able to achieve this board effectiveness?
Yeah, thank you very much, Obi. And again, it will be no surprise that some of my views are aligned with what Dr. just described. I think in my mind, I'd like to speak to 5 critical factors in no particular order, but in my mind, I think they are very important. Number 1 is a clear purpose of the board that is aligned to the organizational goal and strategy. Earlier, we spoke about strategic direction and how that is very important. I think for a board to be successful, they need to know why they're there. That's why it's good practice for a board to articulate a terms of reference, that says, this is who we are, this is how we are composed, and this is our key purpose. I think that clarity of purpose is very important, and it needs to be clarified for success. Second, and this is something Doctor already touched on, I think diversity of the board and good team dynamics is very important. You need a board with a good mix of personalities, skills, perspectives for innovative decision making. You don't want tunnel vision as a collective. You might have it with individuals, but when you have it as a board, then you have a problem. If all the board is thinking the same way, you want that diversity, you want that challenge, you want that friction. It's almost healthy friction for you to be able to debate a matter and arrive at the right solution. So for me, number 2, that's a very critical factor. Number 3 is clarity of roles and responsibilities and even leadership. Yeah. There are many ways that can manifest, whether in procedures, whether it be in organizational policies, whether even in roles, for instance, chair of the main board or the subcommittees. You need that clarity of responsibility and accountability per time. Again, earlier I spoke about the healthy dynamic between the members, whether they be exec and non-exec. Again, that comes from clarity of roles. Who is the audit director reporting to, for instance, the chief internal auditor? Is he reporting to the finance director? Is there a solid or dotted line? As I'm sure most of us here, well, I'm guessing a lot of us here are either accountants or work in that compliance space. You understand the risk there for segregation of duties. And my point is, you just need to be clear on those roles and how they overlap across the board for effective decision-making and reporting. Also, leaning on something Doctor has touched on, I think a critical factor is quality information and communication. A board isn't a non-exec members of the board aren't responsible for day-to-day running. A lot of the time they don't perform that role full time. So you need to think about how are they constantly informed of what's going on, whether through regular meetings, whether through formal reporting packs they receive offline, whether through one-to-one engagement with some of the exec or senior managers. To understand fully the business, you need to create a mechanism for that information passage to the board and to the leadership for their decision-making and for their assessment of performance. It's also important for building trust, because trust is a key value that is responsible for effective running of the board. We spoke about the cadence of meetings, or Doctor spoke about the meetings. You have to have a clear cadence of meeting occurrence and what flows into those meetings. And also the expectation regarding what decisions are meant to come out of those meetings. So that number 4 for me, the general header is quality information and communication. That needs to be working well across the members of the board. And then the final one I would say is there needs to be a mechanism for board evaluation and continuous improvement. How do we measure ourselves as a board? How do we know we're doing well? How do we know we're not? Usually, in my experience, that sort of thing is assigned to an independent organization or independent group or even a partner or board, to perform the assessment. But there needs to be some sort of independence built into that mechanism for assessing our performance. And I think those five things, if we do them well as a board, or at least we try to, I think they go a long way to helping boards succeed.
Thank you very much. So I'll still ask you a question on this just to bring it to life.
Yeah.
And as from your experience as an independent executive director in several boards.
Yeah.
So when you talk about clarity and responsibility,
Yes.
and accountability, how can what actually can one do? Can the board do? Is it to have like a board organogram or something for them to be able to do that? And also the next question will be on quality information and communication. So practically, critical success factors, practically from your experience, what would you advise like a board of directors should do to make sure that both the non-executives and the executives are on the same page, that they get quality information and communication, especially with regards to talked about meeting expectations, being you're able to know that, okay, this is what we want to achieve in this meeting, and being able to know that at the end of the day, we achieve that. So can you give us practical tips?
Okay. So I'll start from the second question. Thank you very much, Obi. So in my experience, I'll say two things. One, the board, again, when you talk about values like honesty, integrity, the board needs to be very clear as to what it needs to help its decision making. The information, the exact content of information per time will differ, yeah, from board to board. I can't give a blanket list of things a board pack should contain. It will depend on the topic and the matter for consideration. But I think the onus is on the board to always be clear on what information will help their decision making. That's one. I think what I've seen in my experience, though, is even when you get that right, sometimes the timeliness of that information isn't great. I've been to board meetings. I've been in situations where, as part of a board, you're getting a 300-page pack the day before the meeting. That's that. Yeah. Unless you're a robot, is as a human, it's almost impossible to look at that information and consume it. So there's a layer where you need to provide feedback and regularly engage to ensure the quality of information is good. But you also need to look at the timeliness of that information. And that's what I mean by, in my experience, we've done drill down sessions where don't give me 300 pages because the 300 pages of narrative will probably go over my head. How can I, as a non-exec, engage with you or engage with the exec team in real time and more regularly to understand the detail of that aspect of the business? So if I'm interested in the technology aspect, it's about finding time with the technology director, separate from the board meeting, and saying, help me to understand your processes, help me to understand your systems, help me to understand more what exactly is that detail, so that when it comes to the board meeting, I know enough and I don't need 300 pages, yeah, to understand. So it's how do you plug in, how do you drill down? I think that's something boards should learn to do more. Again, without, like Doctor said, with a good enough understanding of their role, not to get too involved in the weeds, not to get too involved in the detail. But again, it's a delicate matter, because if you need to get involved in the detail to understand the risk well enough, you talk about risk management. If you're too high level, you don't understand the impact of the risk well enough, and you know, in order to ask the right questions. So it's finding the right balance. But I think as a board member, we have levers we can pull. Those levers of, again, ethics, yeah? Those levers of integrity, those levers of our knowledge of our fiduciary responsibility. And again, just knowledge of what the difference in roles are between the exec and the non-exec. If we pull those levers rightly, we know we know how far to drill, and we know when is enough in order to come back, you know, and then be able to use that information to do our work. But the one big call out, I would say, again, to summarize all I've said, is there are elements there of quality of the information. The board should always be asking the right questions, and they need to know enough to ask those questions, and the timeliness of it. There's no point getting a 200-page pack on the morning of the board meeting. I guarantee you no one has read that pack. Yeah. It's just information over the head. And then it's debatable whether the board is really active and doing the work they should do. So I don't know if that answers the second question. Can you remind me the first question again? Rearticulate the first question so I can address it properly. Sorry. You're mute.
Okay, so the first one was clarity of responsibility and accountability.
Yes.
Can you give us practical tips on how that can be done? Is it by having like a board organogram or something?
Yes. So I've seen board organograms, but a board organogram is the end result. It's the end result of engagement and collaboration to identify who has the right skill sets, understanding the board dynamics, understanding the diversity across the board to be able to allocate those responsibilities. In my experience, I've been part of large boards that have subcommittees. So a typical board will have an audit committee, maybe a remuneration committee, maybe we'll have a performance committee. There have been times in my experience where audit committee, we started to discuss a matter and we said, ooh, because we had clarity of purpose, we had clarity of our role, we said, this matter is not for audit committee. This matter is for remuneration committee, or this matter is for performance committee. An organogram is good to depict who is where, but the expectation is that there has been some engagement, there has been some consideration to identify who amongst the board should sit rightly within those committees. And that's the clarity of roles and responsibility I talk about. Again, in my experience, I've seen places where when the board was set up, the audit director was reporting to the financial director, or the CFO, sorry. And we thought, how can the audit director independently give assurance when he's reporting into the CFO that owns the financial controls? And we said, no, that won't work. There could be a debted line reporting for pay and rations because the CFO pays his salary and for performance assessment. But ultimately, the solid line reporting of the audit director should be to the chair of audit committee, because that ensures that independence. That ensures that if the CFO is the problem, the audit director knows where to go. He's able to go to the chair of audit committee to have that conversation openly and without worry or concern for his job. So that's the sort of reporting I mean. So the organogram is the end result. There are certain behaviors, there are certain values. Again, there are certain open, honest conversations that need to happen before we get to that point. And that's what I've seen in my experience.
Thank you so much. So the critical success factors is it's actually based on a lot of flexibility for the board because it's not cast in stone. And so there's a need for clarity for effective board for a board to be effective, you must be clear. There must be clarity across board, a clarity of responsibility, clarity of relationships, clarity of purpose, clarity of expectations. So I think that's very key. And then you talked about diversity as well. But a critical success factor for a board, it must be diverse. They must see to it that it's diverse for it to be effective. Another point you made, critical success factor, is quality information and communication, which is timely and quality. And you also stress the point of flexibility. And there's a comment here that says the board committees is where you can drill the executives to have better understanding. So that's a very good point from Dr. Dutolu. So so what I'm getting from here, critical success factor, another point is that you just don't have to rely on the formalities. At some point, you have to be proactive, go out and seek more information. And you can do that without like meddling in the ambit of your committee. If you're in the audit committee, then. So thank you so much for that insight. Then to the next question for Dr. Ewelukwa, what do you consider the key performance indicators of an effective board? The key performance indicators, things what we see and indicates good performance for an effective board.
Thank you very much. One can look at that kind of from two perspectives. One internal to the company, but the other one is sort of the perspective of an outsider. For the internal elements, you're looking at, for instance, some of the things we touched on earlier, whether the board meets regularly, the quality of decisions taken by the board. Mr. Adebola earlier touched on the issue of board evaluation. So those are some of the things you pick up in the course of board evaluation, kind of looking at should I say, the administrative workings of the board, okay? But it goes beyond the administrative workings of the board because, of course, a board can meet regularly, but ultimately the question still remains whether the fundamental reason for setting up the board has been achieved or is being achieved. And the second aspect is whether the company as an entity, as a legal entity, is staying out of trouble, okay? Now, so there are many markers you kind of look at if you're trying to figure out whether a board is doing what it should do. So yes, are they meeting regularly? Are they taking timely and effective decisions? But you also need to look at things like the compliance record, okay? There's nothing that damages a company more than negative perception, So let's say a company that produces goods and services, whatever goods or services you provide. If your stakeholders are complaining bitterly about your goods and the services you render, if your share value is dropping drastically for some reason or the other, if you're popping up in the news for things like SEC investigation, then regardless of whether you're meeting regularly, it means that there is something wrong with this company. And the board members, of course, when the board is empowered to appoint a managing director, and for the most part, the board also employs the top level management of a company. But that doesn't absolve the board of responsibility if something is going on fundamentally wrong in the company. You cannot tell the shareholders, oh, it's management that caused it. No, we empowered you to manage this company in our best interest. So you cannot abdicate responsibility by saying that it's management that did it or it's management that didn't do it. So as you're meeting regularly, as you're taking quality and effective decisions, also keep an eye on some of the other elements that may show up the company in poor light, like regulatory investigations, like poor audit findings. By the time you're externally audited, what are the things that show up that if you pick up, for instance, even without the external audit, by merely looking at the internal audit report of a company, it can tell a lot about what's going on within that company. And again, a board cannot wait for one whole year for an external auditor to pick up things. You should be able to call for internal audit reports. So an external person looking at internal audit reports, looking at the how the company is viewed by the regulator. Let's say a company that operates within a regulatory environment, whether you have regulatory investigations going on, whether you have your audited accounts up to date. Is there any report of boardroom squabble? I don't know whether I'll give a more recent instance of there's this company that's been in the news. No, it's not a company, it's a charity, Centerville, that has had a very high profile resignations from its board. There's just the board and the CEO are at daggers drawn. So when you have that kind of situation, it doesn't matter what else is going on, even if you've been meeting regularly. The bottom line is that at the board level, something has gone fundamentally wrong. So it's important for a board to not just tick the boxes in terms of we are meeting regularly. The board members should also keep in mind that if you look at the audited financial statements of a company, the people that take responsibility for the financial statements are not the auditors, they are the directors. And so the directors need to be on their feet, recognize that if this company gets into trouble, it affects everybody, it taints everybody. And so how the corporate governance is set up within the company, very, very important. So in a nutshell, I would say that the KPIs are varied. Some are internal to the company, tracking the administrative workings of the board, but some are much broader, looking at whether the company is delivering on the core purpose of its establishment. If you look at companies like Kodak that filed for bankruptcy, okay, it doesn't matter whether the Kodak directors were meeting every month. The fact is that they oversaw a company that was massive at some point, and then they gradually oversaw the debt of this company. So even if you've ticked all the right boxes that we met regularly, we looked at management reports, etc. But the fact still remained fundamentally that you ran this company into the ground. So it's a holistic perspective looking at the administrative workings of the board, the delivery on the business of the board, and how the regulator perceives the board, and how stakeholders and shareholders perceive the board.
That's a great insight. So I've gained something from this right now, because most times you see, like every jurisdictions have their own, actually very practical and hands-on, and what every board member can even use to assess himself, and the board can use collectively. What is happening in our company? That will give you a great pointer to sit up, and that's so practical. Look at the externals. What are you hearing about yourself or your company in the news? What are the regulators? Are there scoreboards? Those are already performance indicators, because there's no way you can be seeing this, and they are also performance and they're also key results indicators. If these are the results you're having, you are fine, and we are getting from this company, that means that we are not effective. So thank you so much for that, your share of that. So you have to look at your financial results. You look at your public regulatory results and compliance. You also look internally at internal audits. So because if you're not making the right decisions based on all this, it means if you're not making the right decisions, that means you don't really have understanding of the results you have. If you're not looking at the externalities and internal happenings of your company. So thank you so much for that insight. The next question we have here is for Mr. Adebayo, and based on you have been the chair of an audit committee, and also a chair of ethics and values. So do you think that ethics has any significant influence on board effectiveness? from your experience?
Thank you, Obi, for that question. From my experience, I would say yes. Because let's rewind slightly. What are ethics? Ethics are the moral rules that govern an organization or individual behavior and conduct. Yeah, as an organization, as a group, whether higher level as an organization or even as a board sat around the table, we need to have a set of rules which are tied to the values of the organization, which we run ourselves by. Otherwise, it becomes the Wild West, doesn't it? We need ethically to have a compass we work by. So I think it's very important. I think it has an impact because I believe personally from my experience that an ethically focused board is more likely to be able to demonstrate those critical success factors that we described before. We talked about openness of engagement, so integrity. We talked about accountability when it comes to the roles and responsibilities. We talked about, you could also infer fairness, respect. Those values are all ethical values. And only truly if we decide to be an ethical board, I think, are we able to deliver on those regularly, in our day-to-day engagement with each other. But if we take it further slightly, you spoke about board responsibility, we've spoken about fiduciary duty. How do you effectively meet your fiduciary duty if you are not ethical or at least have an intention to be? I know a board role is a difficult role sometimes, and you have to make difficult decisions. I guess the point I'm trying to make is, as long as you have ethics at the back of your mind and they shape those decisions, sometimes decisions are subjective. The way we perceive as an organization what the effect of our decision is sometimes different from what, again, like Doctor described, the external perception of that decision. Yeah, businesses make decisions every day, which if you scrutinize them, they you are ethical, but then the public perception sometimes is slightly different. The point I'm trying to make is, as long as we have, it's very paramount that we start off from that ethical position. Whatever the outcomes, then we deal with, because I think it is fundamental for us meeting those fiduciary duties and delivering of our responsibilities as board members.
Thank you so much. That is so, I agree with you absolutely, because there's no way you can fulfill your fiduciary duties of loyalty, duty of loyalty, duty of care, duty of acting in good faith without being ethical. So that's I agree with you so much. So thank you for that insight.